Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mini Scroll, the daily internet culture podcast bringing you the biggest stories from social media, the creator economy, and the digital space every Monday through Thursday. I'm your host, Lauren Meisner, the founder of the youth digital media brand, Centennial World. Welcome back to Mini Scroll, everyone. Happy December. So before I get into the stories for today, I wanted to share some context about the crashing out story that I reported on last week. So a lot of you guys let me know, and if anybody doesn't know, I'm not from the US, I'm not American, I don't live in the US. So I was missing a little piece of context in this story, which was this term. It's not actually a social media term. It's not even I said it was kind of millennials being like, oh, I'm crashing, I'm tired. And Gen Z is using it as I'm freaking out. No, apparently the term, a lot of you guys let me know, originated from AAVE, which is African American Vernacular English. So this is just another example of AAVE being co-opted as slang by young people online. So yes, everything else that I said in that story is true, but I was missing that big, piece of context. So I would now say if you were going to create content using that slang, maybe just don't. Maybe just don't. Okay, the first story that I have for you guys today, this is actually a little bit of a legal episode for you guys. The first story is I need to talk about how the Australian social media ban for children under 16 passed Senate last week in a world first law. Last Thursday, the Australian Senate approved the highly debated social media ban for children under 16. So I covered this a couple of weeks ago because I am actually based in Australia. I know it's confusing. People always comment that on YouTube. They always get very confused when I talk about Australia because I obviously don't have an Australian accent. I'm from Canada, but I live in Australia. So basically, this bill was introduced, debated, and passed within 1 week. That's not to say that the idea for the bill came about all within a week. I know that they were kind of talking about it for several months, but all of that happened, the process all happened within a week. So that is very contentious. I mean, this bill in general is very contentious, but a lot of people feel like the process itself was very, very rushed. And there were also a lot of experts saying that this is just not the right way to go about a law like this, but obviously, they didn't listen to that. So the law puts the onus directly on the platforms, where social media platforms must take, quote, reasonable steps to ensure a user is 16 plus. If they don't take reasonable steps to verify age, they can be fined up to 50 million Australian dollars. Those reasonable steps are not specified or defined, so it will be up to the tech platforms to come up with their own plan. The Safety Commissioner in Australia will come up with some guidelines on what those reasonable steps should be or could be, which will be informed by an age assurance technology trial that is currently underway. So the laws apply to a new government definition of age-restricted social media platforms, where the, quote, significant purpose is to enable social media interaction between two or more users. So they will be able to include or exclude different platforms under this definition. So far, they are excluding messaging apps like WhatsApp, gaming services, and education platforms. So that could be something like Canva or a university forum. The laws only apply to having an account. This is kind of the caveat. So logged out use doesn't come under this. So if you're 14 and you're watching YouTube videos without logging in, YouTube doesn't have to worry about this. They will not be fined for this. And all of this will not come into effect until the end of 2025, so about a year. Okay, so like I said, this is very contentious. I'll kind of go through some of the major points. This definitely won't hit all of them. But one of the biggest points of contention is this law isn't as prescriptive as people would have liked. So the definition of an age-restricted platform is still kind of up for debate. There's also possibility that this won't necessarily be as impactful as I think they hoped. So something that has been brought up is that platforms already generally kind of know our age. Like, these giant platforms have a whole range of ways to estimate how old a user is, even if they don't put their age into the platform. And they are using these measures to enforce their own age gating. So now for most platforms, that's 13. But regardless, they have all these measures in place to estimate our ages. And, that covers their own asses. It also helps with advertising, things like that. So like I said, for most platforms, the age gating is 13. So children under 13, like, they might make an account, but once the platform discovers this, based on all of these kind of user activity factors, they will, in theory, ban that account. So this law really is just putting pressures on platforms to be more specific about how they are coming to conclusions about users' ages and making that public, like creating policy around that and then making that public in the hopes of enforcing age gating more strongly with the possibility of a fine. And obviously they are also raising that age, right, from 13 to 16. Now, things that this bill doesn't address, that has some people kind of raising their eyebrows: the privacy concerns around big tech companies that are not Australian having access to the government ID of children, and also probably many adults who are having to enter into this age gating process. And the bill doesn't address the actual biggest threat to children online, which is platforms' algorithmic models, right? It's not the content itself necessarily that is harmful to children or just to any of us. I mean, there is a lot of harmful content out there, but it's the algorithm that ends up kind of sending you down this pipeline and then eventually feeding you that content. So this bill doesn't address that concern. So all of that to say, where I stand, I mean, I don't know, I feel very conflicted, honestly. I think that this is not necessarily the right way to go about addressing these problems, but I appreciate that I guess a government is trying. I do think that children under 16 should not be on social media, but I think saying they should not be on social media is different from saying they cannot be on it. And I think the biggest problem that I see here is that the problem itself is already too big. It's taken too long to act on the concept of algorithmic models and recommendations to begin with. And now, honestly, I feel like it's almost an impossible area to govern. And social media is nowhere near the biggest factor for children's poor mental health. Time and time again, the research comes out and they're finding that social media has less of an impact than I think we as like everyday people and users would expect. I think the actual focus of the bill and the law is misdirected. I think something needs to be in place. Absolutely. We've talked about this a million times, but like, it really is algorithms and moderation that we need to be going after, and AI. My friend Crystal Andrews, she works at Crikey here in Australia, and she also runs ZFeed. She put it really well. We were talking about this bill in Slack today, and she wrote, "Why isn't there any legislation being drafted to protect the use of my likeness without my permission when it comes to AI?" It feels like there are just bigger problems at play, but I also understand that I think we have to start somewhere. I don't think this is necessarily the right place to start, but we have to start somewhere. Also, go back and listen to my episode where I talked about it. I think it was a couple weeks ago, where I talked about like how this bill came about, because it did not come about in the most genuine way. It was pretty insidious, and it will maybe make you side-eye this bill passing in general. Okay, the next story that I have for you guys is I need to break down for you the battle of the beige influencers. Okay, so this story was actually sent to me by a listener. Thank you so much. You guys can always send me tips. You can DM it to me, you can email it to me, you can just always send me any stories that you think might be relevant, and I'll see if they make sense. And this one absolutely does. Okay, so this is actually another landmark case in social media, but this one involves a lawsuit between two influencers. Okay, so TikTok creator Sydney Nicole Gifford, she is 24, she lives in Minnesota. And then there's another TikTok influencer, Alyssa Scheel, who is 21 and lives in Texas. Both Sydney and Alyssa are lifestyle creators, and they have a very similar aesthetic. Think like neutrals, clean girl vibes. That's why people are calling this the battle of the beige influencers, because all their shit is beige. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. So Sydney has filed a lawsuit against Alyssa, claiming that Alyssa duplicated her quote, neutral beige and cream aesthetics, promoted the same Amazon products, and used similar language across TikTok, Instagram, and her Amazon storefront. Sydney also claims that Alyssa copies some of her content frame for frame. So this sounds kind of insane, right? Like filing a lawsuit for an aesthetic that no one owns. Like, Sydney did not create this aesthetic. Every girl on TikTok is obsessed with this aesthetic. It is like the vibe of what everybody thinks is like chic right now. Well, journalist Mia Sato for The Verge actually interviewed both women in a piece about this lawsuit, and she got some interesting insight. Quote, "This aggressively neutral aesthetic is wildly popular. It's so ubiquitous online that I might be the weird one for not liking it. This minimalism is also aspirational. Millions of people have seen Giffords and Shields videos, and thousands have likely purchased products from their affiliate links. What I was not prepared for, even after watching hours of their content online, was that it wasn't just their social media profiles that were monochrome. Their lives and their homes are exactly the same. It's like you grabbed the corners of your phone screen and expanded a TikTok video out into a world of neutrals." In speaking with Sato, Alyssa pushed back on the lawsuit, saying, quote, "There are hundreds of people with the exact same aesthetic, and I'm the only one that's having to go through this. It's coming across very gatekeepy. Like, I'm the only one that's allowed to be successful in this program, as in the Amazon storefront program. I'm the only one that's allowed to put my foot in the door. I do think that there's space and definitely enough money for everyone that's in the Amazon influencer program." However, here is where it gets a little bit interesting. So Sydney and Alyssa apparently met in Austin in December 2022 with the intention of collaborating and helping each other's businesses out. They did a joint photo shoot in January 2023, so 1 month later, and afterward, Alyssa blocked Sydney on social media. Quote, "She says it's because she didn't feel the need to keep up with the relationship online if it wasn't all that brilliant in real life," reports the Daily Mail. Okay, so imagine you meet someone like a colleague in your industry. You guys do like a little work project together and you don't really hit it off. You don't block them. You just don't. You just don't block them. That's so extreme. So then Sydney's followers started messaging her saying that Alyssa's content was very much resembling hers. Alyssa was sent a cease and desist, and when she didn't allegedly stop copying Sydney's content, Sydney filed the lawsuit. Look, all of this is like a little bit crazy because everyone has the same stuff. This is like an ongoing conversation on TikTok. Everyone dresses the same, everyone buys the same clothes, everyone buys the same furniture, everyone suits the same aesthetic. Like, it's all the same. So aesthetic aside, I think the frame for frame content copying part is the most interesting of this to me, because we've seen so many instances of creator plagiarism over the years and so little is ever done about it. So I think from an IP perspective, if Alyssa really is copying Sydney's content frame for frame, then I do think that this lawsuit and the press around it could end up being a step maybe towards creators kind of taking this more seriously and being able to take this into their own hands. And I mentioned this a few months ago, but a segment of our podcast script, one of our podcast scripts from earlier this year, which we do write by hand, was copied nearly word for word by a much bigger YouTuber. And when I reached out to various creators who have much bigger platforms than we do, like asking, has this happened to you before? What should you do? Basically, everyone just said, let it go because there's nothing that can be done. And, if this was not a podcast and this was like a written piece of work that we published on our website or anywhere else, that would be like straight up plagiarism. So I think there is this kind of interesting fuzzy line because like video and podcasting, it's not like the written word technically. So I don't think there's as much knowledge around how to enforce copyright or IP ownership and things like that. So I think that part of this lawsuit is very interesting if she is copying her videos frame for frame. And I actually don't know much about that law in terms of like in the US for like video and stuff, like how that would hold up. But there definitely need to be more protections in place for stuff like podcasts and video, like media that is not written. I'll keep you guys posted on anything else that comes out about it. I'll also link the Verge interview down below because it's very in-depth. But this is just so interesting. The last story that I have for you guys is we need to talk about how Ballerina Farm has appeared on the cover of Evie Magazine. So Queen of the Tradwives, Ballerina Farm, whose real name is Hannah Nealman, is the cover star of Evie Magazine's 2024 print issue. Okay, so this is going super viral because for anyone that doesn't know, Evie Magazine is a, quote, politically conservative American women's magazine. It was founded in February 2019 by husband and wife Gabriel Hugo Boom and Brittany Martinez, with Martinez as editor-in-chief. According to Vice, the website has spread COVID-19 misinformation and vaccination misinformation presented as part of a traditionalist and anti-feminist worldview. So that is directly from their Wikipedia page. But feminist author Jessica Valenti describes Evie. She talks about that, like how it's kind of, it's like this anti-feminist conservative magazine. But she also recently called it, quote, a front for an anti-birth control propaganda campaign.
Because Evie is not really a magazine. Evie is a front. Evie is a billionaire-backed front for a massive anti-birth control propaganda campaign that includes a period tracking app where they're collecting women's data. Yes, at first glance, if you look at their publication, if you look at the website, it seems like this right-wing, ultra right-wing conservative Christian publication. It has anti-trans rhetoric, all the stuff that you would expect. A lot of stuff on birth control, a lot, and there's a reason for that. So they had an article once that said the symptoms of hormonal birth control are indistinguishable from the symptoms of PTSD. They had another one that said women who use IUDs can sometimes hear voices and drown their newborns. Really wild shit. And they're pumping out article after article after article. And the reason they're doing that is so that when a young woman goes to search for information on birth control, does a Google search, their insane misinformation comes up.
Okay, so the reason why people are discussing Hannah being on the cover of this magazine is because of how Hannah, over this past year, and honestly, most of the big tradwife creators position themselves or talk about their influence, quote unquote. They usually claim that there's no political agenda tied to their content, and they simply just love having babies, they love farming, they love making sourdough. And a lot of people, especially white women who see themselves, I guess, in them, maybe reflected back in them, have believed them or defended them this past year. That rang even more true when the Times piece came out, and a lot of people, again, mostly white women, called it a hit piece against Hannah and her family. So Hannah being on this magazine that is so politically charged, that is saying the quiet part out loud. That is making a very strong statement. This is fully letting her guard down and showing us where Ballerina Farm and her family stand, and really backing up the notion that we all know, but a lot of people refuse to believe, that the tradwife content that they are all creating is rooted in white supremacy and anti-feminist ideology. And I don't think that this would be such a big deal online right now, Hannah being on this cover, if there wasn't such a phenomenon that we see lately. There's this thing going on online that's happened over the last few years where internet users conflate online bullying with genuine analysis. So when the Times piece came out and people were making content analyzing what was written for us, that the journalists experienced firsthand, analyzing that content, making educated assumptions based on that content, based on Ballerina Farm's account, based on what we know of the tradwife movement and what we know of her husband's family, et cetera, making these assumptions and talking about the social and cultural implications of this type of content and these types of creators. Those people were called bullies. And this conflation was even more amplified when Hannah came out herself and cried victim, and said that the piece was written poorly, misrepresentative of her family. And there is truly no group of people in this world that we see this conflation benefit more than a white woman who cries victim. And as a white woman myself, That's all I'm going to say on that. I hope that Ballerina Farm, not just associating herself with this magazine, but featuring as the cover star of the year on it, is a bit of a wake-up call to those people who were criticizing the analysis of the trad wife movement and the questioning of the trad wife movement, because now this is pretty black and white. Like, we cannot deny this. Anyways, guys. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening to Mini Scroll. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It helps me so much. It helps me grow. Please star rate us on Spotify. We're trying to get to 500 Spotify ratings by the end of the year. I love you guys, and I will talk to you tomorrow.